stupid. Shut up. The words, saturated with bottom-shelf whiskey and misplaced arrogance, sliced through the murky atmosphere of the watering hole like jagged metal. The assembled crowd, a patchwork of servicemen unwinding from duty and the hangers-on who circulated in their orbit, responded with a choreography of cowardice that could have been rehearsed. Nervous snickering erupted from the table where the speaker held court. Throughout the establishment, patrons suddenly discovered profound interest in the water droplets sliding down their beer glasses. An unspoken pact formed instantaneously: avert your gaze, stay uninvolved, let the pack have their entertainment. Yet the woman seated alone at the counter, the intended victim of this verbal assault, displayed zero acknowledgement. No startle reflex. No sharp intake of breath. Her body remained fixed in its position, not a muscle betraying disturbance. Her attention stayed anchored to the dense technical volume before her, its cover displaying nothing but austere circuit diagrams that screamed complexity. But Colonel Marcus Vance, tucked away in the shadows of a rear booth, observed something others missed: the nearly invisible way her shoulders descended, not in submission, but settling into a state of complete and total composure. A spark of recognition, something primordial and alarming, ignited in his consciousness. He understood with bone-deep certainty that chilled the liquor in his tumbler: these fools hadn't backed a lamb into a corner. They had just loudly, idiotically announced themselves to a predator in repose. If you understand that genuine power manifests not through volume but through restraint, not in declaration but in execution, type silence below. The establishment known as the Rusty Canteen operated on a foundation of expectations. It expected patrons wanted their alcohol inexpensive, their illumination subdued, and their soundtrack thunderous enough to obliterate the resonance of what they did or employment at nearby Fort Gideon. This was an unofficial extension of military life, a decompression chamber where machismo could be safely released and rank structures could be theatrically dismissed, even while being ruthlessly maintained. The atmosphere hung thick with the accumulated essence of countless fried appetizers, the acidic sweetness of spilled lager, and the damp mineral scent of rain-saturated outerwear. Tonight, beneath the familiar percussion of billiard collisions and slurred debates, a more ominous undertone emanated from the television mounted haphazardly in the corner. A news presenter, her features arranged in practiced gravitas, detailed the nationwide pursuit of Jonathan Crane, former Navy SEAL, decorated warrior, now alleged betrayer. The accusation: trafficking highly classified communications intelligence architecture to hostile powers. A violation so profound it jeopardized field operators across continents. At a circular table dominating the room's center, Sergeant First Class Rex Miller, a man whose physical mass rivaled only the amplitude of his opinions, presided over his audience. An infantry soldier constructed like reinforced masonry and possessing approximately equivalent sophistication, he had appointed himself authority on all matters tactical, ethical, and beyond. His disciples, Specialist Davis and Specialist Chun, nodded reflexively at his every declaration. "A goddamn SEAL," Miller thundered, punctuating with his mug and sloshing foam across the scarred surface. "Survives all that selection, all that punishment, just to sell us down the river. Should put a round in his skull on sight. Forget the trial. Why waste taxpayer dollars?" Davis, young and eager for approval, added, "I can't wrap my head around it, Sarge. How does someone at that level even flip?" Miller reclined, assuming an expression of smug wisdom. "It's the ego, kid. They start buying their own mythology. Start thinking they're above regulations, above the nation they swore to protect. It's a disease, a toxin." This conversation was theater, and every soul in the bar was conscripted as unwilling spectator. Then came a sound so faint it barely registered, a whisper of a word: assumptions. If you're captivated by stories where silent competence demolishes loud arrogance, where the quietest voice carries the most weight, subscribe to The Final Watch for more tales of unsung professionals who change everything without saying a word. It originated from the bar, from the woman in the nondescript charcoal hoodie and faded denim. Her name was Cassandra Thorne, though nobody present knew this, nor would they have cause to. To this audience, she registered as a 30-something civilian, neither striking enough to attract immediate attention nor plain enough to achieve complete invisibility. She simply existed. She'd occupied that position for the past hour, maintaining a single glass of water with citrus, her focus apparently submerged in a textbook titled Advanced Signal Propagation and Intercept Dynamics. The utterance she'd produced wasn't aimed at any individual. It was an escaped observation, an involuntary verbal manifestation from a mind habituated to deconstructing intricate puzzles. But in the charged environment of Miller's monologue, it became an incendiary spark. Miller's attention snapped toward her, his eyes, small and flint-hard, contracting. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his voice descending into a more threatening register. Cassie didn't acknowledge him. She methodically, unhurriedly inserted a slender leather marker into her book and closed it, her finger preserving her position. She lifted her water glass and took a measured sip. The silence expanded, each passing moment a fresh assault on Miller's dominance. "I'm addressing you," he stated, rising from his seat. His bulk cast her in shadow. "You got opinions about our special operations personnel?" He was performing now, framing her as outsider, as critic. "Think you've got knowledge we lack? Absorbed it from one of your little textbooks?" His companion snickered obligingly. Cassie finally raised her eyes. They were an indeterminate shade of hazel, revealing nothing, no fear, no fury, no contrition. She simply observed him with clinical detachment, as though examining an unremarkable specimen under laboratory conditions. "I said nothing," she replied, her tone level and undisturbed. It was factually accurate, but it was also a dismissal. And that dismissal ignited his rage. "Oh, you're real quiet, aren't you?" he sneered, closing distance, violating her personal space. "Think you're superior to a grunt like me? Let me educate you, lady. While you're perched here with your nose buried in literature, men like Johnny Crane, before he turned traitor, and men like me, we're out there getting our hands filthy so you can have your precious opinions. So when we're discussing our profession, you keep your damn mouth sealed." He glanced back at his supporters, a triumphant smirk spreading. He'd located his foil. He'd established his supremacy. He delivered the final, ugly proclamation, the line that would seal his fate and become base legend. "Stupid. Shut up." The laughter that erupted was wet and malicious, a blend of genuine cruelty from Miller's table and nervous, compel. Illicit chuckling from others grateful the spotlight wasn't on them. Cassie Thorne became an island in a sea of mockery. But on that island, no tempest raged. She didn't retreat. She didn't flush or break eye contact. Her gaze remained unwavering on Miller's face. Within her silence existed a weight, a gravitational density that his hollow pronouncements couldn't penetrate. This wasn't silence as absence, it was silence as presence, a discipline so deeply embedded it had long ago conquered the base human impulse toward reaction. She maintained his gaze for 3 complete seconds, an eternity in the suddenly tense establishment. Then, with surgical economy of motion, she collected her water glass, took another small sip, and returned it precisely to the bar, centering it perfectly on its damp coaster. Her hands, visible beneath the dim overhead lights, seemed unremarkable initially. No jewelry, no polish, no delicate characteristics. But closer examination, the kind Colonel Vance was conducting from his corner, revealed more. The nails were clipped short, immaculately maintained. Across the knuckles of her right hand, a lattice of faint, silver scars crisscrossed the skin. The kind of scarring that didn't originate from culinary mishaps. These came from impact, repeated, precise impact. Her posture on the stool wasn't the casual slouch of a civilian patron. She sat in perfect equilibrium, her mass centered, her feet planted flat on the floor, not hooked on the stool's rungs. This was a posture of readiness, of stored potential energy, a body coiled like a compressed spring, even in apparent rest. Her attention, which appeared directed at her reading material, was deceptive. Vance had monitored her for nearly an hour. Her eyes, while seeming to scan text, were actually engaged in constant, methodical surveillance of the entire space. A classic figure-8 scanning pattern covering every entrance, every exit, every face. She wasn't reading. She was operating. The book was camouflage. The water was camouflage. Her entire unremarkable presence was meticulously constructed concealment. The crisis, when it materialized, didn't announce itself with violence but with a subtle atmospheric shift. On the television, the somber anchor yielded to a live field correspondent. "We're receiving reports," the correspondent said, voice tight with urgency, "that federal agents are converging on a location of interest in the Jonathan Crane investigation. Sources indicate they believe Crane may have a contact, a handle. Meeting him tonight to facilitate extraction from the country. The target zone is a commercial district adjacent to a major military installation." The camera panned to reveal a street unsettlingly familiar to everyone in the rusty canteen. It was their street. Anxious murmuring rippled through the bar. Suddenly Miller's loud theorizing felt less like academic debate and more like proximate threat. Everyone began scrutinizing fellow patrons with fresh suspicion. Anyone could be the contact. Anyone could be Crane. Miller, to his credit, sobered instantly. "Lock it down," he barked at the bartender, his NCO training activating. "Nobody enters, nobody exits." But he was too late. The predator already occupied the cage. Cassie's eyes, which had maintained their methodical sweep, now locked onto a singular target. Not a man resembling a cinematic operative. A man who resembled nothing at all, nondescript, 50s, economical suit, solo at a small table with a beer. He hadn't uttered a word all evening. But Cassie had catalogued him an hour prior. She'd noted the timepiece on his wrist, a Russian-manufactured Vostok amphibia, and peculiar selection for someone presenting as a traveling salesman. She'd observed the subtle, almost imperceptible bulge under his left lapel, a bulge that didn't move like a wallet. And now she noticed his thumb rhythmically, nervously tapping his smartphone. A specific 5-beat pattern. Not a nervous tick. Morse code. SOS. He was compromised and signaling abort. The suited man began rising, movement rigid and unnatural. His right hand remained on the table near his phone, but his left drifted toward the bulge in his jacket. He was preparing to create violent distraction and escape in the subsequent chaos. Miller and his subordinates, now in full security mode, were scanning for obvious threats. They were hunting for action movie stereotypes, someone radiating danger. They looked straight past the economical suit, and completely disregarded the woman in the charcoal hoodie who was now, for the first time, moving from her stool. Cassie didn't stand. She flowed. In one liquid, seamless motion, she pivoted off the bar stool, her body low and compact. The entire sequence consumed less than 2 seconds, but for witnesses, time seemed to dilate, stretching into a series of perfectly executed crystalline moments. Her left foot slid forward, right leg sweeping back. She wasn't walking. She was gliding across the floor, her center of gravity impossibly low, like a hunting cat. The suited man had taken 2 steps toward the exit when Cassie intercepted him. She didn't shout. She didn't draw a weapon. She simply materialized in his path. His first instinct was to shove her aside, to treat her as the insignificant obstacle she appeared to be. It was the final professional mistake he would ever make. As his hand rose to push her, her right hand shot out, not to block, but to redirect. Her fingers, those fingers with the faint silver scars, clamped down on his wrist with anatomical precision targeting the radial nerve. Pure white-hot agony shot up his arm, and his hand went instantly numb. Simultaneously, her left hand snaked inside his jacket, fingers closing around the cold, hard shape of a suppressed pistol in a shoulder holster. With a single brutally efficient twist, she ripped the entire holster assembly free from its moorings. In the same fluid motion, her right foot struck out, not at his torso or head, but at the medial aspect of his left knee. The joint buckled with a sickening wet pop. His leg collapsed beneath him, his body twisting as he fell. As he descended, Cassie used his momentum against him, guiding his fall. She wasn't just taking him down, she was positioning him. He landed hard on his back, skull striking the sticky floor with a dull thud. The phone flew from his limp hand, skidding across the floor to rest near the pool table. Cassie stood over him, perfectly balanced. The captured pistol and holster in her left hand, her right hand now empty and relaxed at her side. Her face remained a mask of absolute professional calm. The entire violent choreography had been conducted in near-total silence. The aftermath was a void. The noisy, chaotic bar, moments before a cacophony of panicked murmurs and Miller's shouted commands, was now utterly, profoundly silent. The only sounds, the hum of refrigeration, the faint tinny voice of the reporter still broadcasting from the television, and the ragged, pained gasps of the man on the floor. Every eye locked on the tableau. They saw the suited man, a man they hadn't even registered, writhing on the floor, face contorted in agony and disbelief. They saw the suppressed pistol, a weapon of silent, deadly intent, held loosely in the hand of the woman they'd all dismissed. And they saw her, Cassandra Thorne, standing over him, not breathing heavily, not adrenalized, but as still and serene as sculpture. Her expression hadn't changed. She remained the scientist observing a specimen, the experiment having reached its logical and successful conclusion. Rex Miller stood frozen, mouth agape. The words he'd shouted, the insults, the smug proclamations now hung in the air like toxic phantoms. Stupid. Shut up. The irony was suffocating. She hadn't shut up. She had acted. And in her action, in that silent, terrifyingly competent display, she had communicated in a language he couldn't comprehend, a language of pure, unadulterated professionalism that rendered his entire universe of bluster and bravado utterly meaningless. "No way," Specialist Davis whispered, voice trembling. That's impossible." Chun just stared, eyes wide, his gaze toggling between Cassie and the neutralized man, his brain refusing to process the sensory data. The patrons, the bartender, the entire population of the Rusty Canteen united in a singular collective state of shock. They had just witnessed something impossible, a violation of natural order. Unassuming civilians weren't supposed to move like that. They weren't supposed to disarm and disable a trained professional with such effortless, contemptuous ease. The woman they had laughed at, the woman they had ignored, had just single-handedly neutralized a threat that had an entire federal task force on high alert. The silence in the room was more than absence of noise. It was presence. It was the sound of dozens of arrogant assumptions shattering simultaneously. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting, of a legend being born in a sticky, beer-soaked crucible. Into this tableau of stunned silence, a new figure moved. From the darkened corner booth, Colonel Marcus Vance emerged, his movements deliberate and authoritative. The crowd, still mesmerized by Cassie, seemed to part for him instinctively, silent recognition of higher authority. Vance was a man carved by time and conflict, his face a topographical map of deployments to places that didn't officially exist. Commander of the 75th Ranger Regiment stationed at Fort Gideon, a living legend himself, though unlike Miller, he never felt compelled to announce it. He didn't look at the man on the floor. He didn't look at the weapon in Cassie's hand. His eyes fixed solely on her. He walked slowly, boots making soft rhythmic contact with the wooden floor, until he stood directly before her. The bar was so quiet a falling pin would have thundered. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but inside the Rusty Canteen, the world had contracted to these two figures. Vance's face was unreadable, but his eyes, piercing blue, held a complex mixture of recognition, respect, and something resembling professional courtesy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded instant attention. Issa. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Cassie gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was the first acknowledgement she'd given anyone. Vance extended a hand, not to take the weapon, but palm up, a request. "ID, please." Without a word, Cassie reached into her back pocket and produced a thin, unassuming wallet. She flipped it open to a single laminated card and handed it to him. It wasn't a driver's license. It was a Department of Defense Common Access card, but a different color than the ones Vance saw daily. It was black. Vance took the card, eyes scanning the printed information. The name read, Thorne, Cassandra. The rank was listed simply as GS-15, a high-level civilian, but that didn't explain the black card or the skill set he'd just witnessed. Then his eyes fell on a small, almost invisible sigil printed in the bottom right corner. A stylized ghost superimposed over a key, and below it, a single cryptic designator, A7. Vance's entire demeanor shifted. The professional curiosity in his eyes was replaced by profound, almost reverent respect. He handed the card back to her as if it were a sacred relic. He didn't see a civilian contractor anymore. He didn't see a woman in a charcoal hoodie. He saw the sigil, and the sigil unlocked a cascade of classified memories, of whispered legends from the highest echelons of special operations and intelligence communities. Into this tableau of stunned silence, a new figure moved. From the darkened corner booth, Colonel Marcus Vance emerged, his movements deliberate and authoritative. The crowd, still mesmerized by Cassie, seemed to part for him instinctively, silent recognition of higher authority. Vance was a man carved by time and conflict, his face a topographical map of deployments to places that didn't officially exist. Commander of the 75th Ranger Regiment stationed at Fort Gideon, a living legend himself, though unlike Miller, he never felt compelled to announce it. He didn't look at the man on the floor. He didn't look at the weapon in Cassie's hand. His eyes fixed solely on her. He walked slowly, boots making soft rhythmic contact with the wooden floor, until he stood directly before her. The bar was so quiet a falling pin would have thundered. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but inside the rusty canteen, the world had contracted to these two figures. Vance's face was unreadable, but his eyes, piercing blue, held a complex mixture of recognition, respect, and something resembling professional courtesy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded instant attention. "Issa." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Cassie gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was the first acknowledgement she'd given anyone. Vance extended a hand, not to take the weapon, but palm up, a request. "ID, please." Without a word, Cassie reached into her back pocket and produced a thin, unassuming wallet. She flipped it open to a single laminated card and handed it to him. It wasn't a driver's license. It was a Department of Defense Common Access card, but a different color than the ones Vance saw daily. It was black. Vance took the card, eyes scanning the printed information. The name read, Thorne, Cassandra. The rank was listed simply as GS-15, a high-level civilian, but that didn't explain the black card or the skill set he'd just witnessed. Then his eyes fell on a small, almost invisible sigil printed in the bottom right corner. A stylized ghost superimposed over a key, and below it, a single cryptic designator, A7. Vance's entire demeanor shifted. The professional curiosity in his eyes was replaced by profound, almost reverent respect. He handed the card back to her as if it were a sacred relic. He didn't see a civilian contractor anymore. He didn't see a woman in a charcoal hoodie. He saw the sigil, and the sigil unlocked a cascade of classified memories, of whispered legends from the highest echelons of special operations and intelligence communities. He saw A7, the designation for the 7th active field agent of a unit so classified it was only referred to as the Aquarians, a group that didn't just collect intelligence. They hunted and retired the ghosts of the nation's worst intelligence failures. He saw the Damascus incident, where a rogue CIA station chief had been neutralized in his own fortified embassy, not with a bullet, but with a rare, untraceable toxin administered via handshake, an operation credited to an unknown asset. That asset was A7. He saw the architect of Operation Silent Atone, a multi-year cyber campaign that didn't just disrupt but completely dismantled an entire GRU spy network in Eastern Europe. A digital phantom in the machine who left behind a single mocking line of code as her only calling card. The code read simply, A7. He saw the commendation, the one he'd only heard rumors about, personally and secretly signed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs for identifying and exposing a 4-star general who had been a mole for 2 decades. The investigation had been initiated by a single anonymous 3-page report of such analytical brilliance it was now used as a teaching document at the National Security Agency. The report wasn't signed, but its file designation was Aquarian 7. He saw a woman who didn't just work in the shadows. She was a shadow, a living weapon forged in the silent, unseen wars that kept the loud, visible ones from ever starting. And in that moment, Colonel Marcus Vance, commander of the world's most elite light infantry, did something no one in that bar had ever seen him do. He squared his shoulders, brought his heels together, and rendered a crisp, perfect, formal salute to the civilian woman standing before him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now imbued with absolute deference. "My apologies for the disturbance on my post." The doors to the rusty canteen burst open, and a flood of military police and plainclothes federal agents swarmed in, weapons drawn, shouting calm. "Ans." The spell of silence shattered, replaced by the organized chaos of a tactical response. But Colonel Vance held up a single hand, and the chaos subsided. The lead MP, a young captain, saw the colonel saluting and froze, his face a mask of confusion. He looked from his revered regimental commander to the unassuming woman, and his brain short-circuited. Vance slowly lowered his hand and turned, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the soldiers in the room, finally landing with the force of a physical blow on Sergeant First Class Rex Miller. Miller, who had been a statue of shocked disbelief, visibly flinched, color draining from his face. He looked like a child caught committing arson in the principal's office. Vance's voice, when he spoke, was not loud. It was quiet. It was cold. It was terrifying. "Sergeant Miller," he began, the words like chips of ice. "You are an NCO in the United States Army. You are supposed to be a leader, a professional. You are supposed to embody our values. And tonight, you and your men," he gestured dismissively at Davis and Chun, who looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them, "have failed in every conceivable way." He took a step closer to Miller. "You sat here in a public establishment disparaging a fallen brother in arms, a SEAL about whom you know nothing. You postured and you played the big tough soldier for a civilian audience. And then you chose to direct your arrogance, your profound, bottomless ignorance, at a woman you knew nothing about." Vance paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You assumed, Sergeant. You assumed because she was a woman, because she was quiet, because she was reading a book, that she was less than you. You assumed she was weak. You assumed she was stupid." He pointed a single trembling finger at Cassie, who was now quietly conferring with one of the federal agents, handing over the captured pistol and calmly debriefing him. "Sergeant Miller, look at her. That woman you so eloquently called stupid, her security clearance is so far above yours that you are not legally authorized to even know her real name. The book she was reading is a technical manual for a signals intercept system that she personally designed. The man on the floor is not Jonathan Crane. He's Crane's handler, a senior SVR officer we've been hunting for 5 years. While you and your men were playing soldier and drinking cheap beer, she was on the job. She identified him. She isolated him. And she neutralized him without a single shot fired. In your bar. Right under your nose. Vance leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You clowns were arguing about the game. She was the one playing it, and she just won. You are a discer. Ace to your rank and to this regiment. You will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow for your formal reprimand. And you will pray, Sergeant. You will pray to whatever God you believe in that she does not decide to file a formal complaint. Because if she does, your career will not just be over. It will be erased. He straightened. Now get out of my sight. The story of that night spread through Fort Gideon, not like wildfire, but like a change in atmospheric pressure. It wasn't shouted in the mess halls. It was whispered in the barracks. It wasn't a headline. It was a ghost story, a cautionary tale passed in hushed tones between fire teams and in quiet moments before training ops. They called it Miller's Folly, or more poetically, the Ballad of the Rusty Canteen. Details shifted and warped in the retelling, as they always do. In some versions, she took down 3 men. In others, she did it with her eyes closed. The man on the floor became a legendary FSB assassin, not just a handler. The book she was reading became a coded message from the CIA director himself. The myth grew, but the core lesson, the terrifying, humbling truth of it, remained perfectly intact. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, a stark reminder that the deadliest threats and the most formidable protectors often come in the quietest, most unassuming packages. The legend served as a powerful corrective to a culture that too often conflated loudness with leadership and arrogance with ability. Young lieutenants fresh from West Point, full of theoretical knowledge, were quietly taken aside by their platoon sergeants and told the story. Cocky young privates eager to prove their toughness were reminded that the quiet professional in the corner might be the one who wrote the book on it. The name Cassandra Thorne was never spoken. She was only ever the ghost, or A7, or most commonly, simply her. Remember what happened to Miller became a new form of admonishment on the base, a phrase freighted with meaning, verbal shorthand for, check your ego at the door. The culture of the post began to subtly shift, a new current of professional humility running beneath the surface of its hardened military exterior. It was a legacy of silence, a lesson taught not by lecture or training manual, but by a single undeniable demonstration of quiet, absolute competence. Sergeant First Class Rex Miller was a changed man. The blistering public evisceration by Colonel Vance had stripped him of his bluster, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He reported to Vance's office at 0559 the next morning. The reprimand was brutal, a career-staining document that would follow him forever. But the real punishment wasn't on paper. It was internal. For the next several months, Miller became a ghost himself. He was reassigned from his line platoon to a logistics company, tasked with inventorying dusty equipment in a cavernous warehouse. His booming voice was gone, replaced by a quiet, subservient monotone. His swagger was replaced by a slumped, defeated posture. He had been a big fish in a small pond, and he had been shown, in the most public way imaginable, that he was swimming in an ocean he didn't even know existed. One afternoon, weeks after the incident, he saw her. Cassie was walking across the main post quad, dressed in the same civilian attire, carrying a different, equally intimidating technical book. She was heading toward a nondescript building that Miller now knew housed a signals intelligence analysis wing. He froze, his heart pounding. He felt a desperate, overwhelming urge to apologize, to somehow atone for his behavior. He took a hesitant step toward her, opening his mouth to speak. Cassie's eyes, those calm, analytical hazel eyes, flicked toward him for a fraction of a second. There was no anger in them. No pity. No recognition at all. It was the look one might give a piece of furniture, an inanimate object in one's peripheral vision. And then she was gone, her focus already on her destination. That single blank look was more devastating to Miller's ego than Vance's entire tirade. It told him more clearly than any words that he was so far beneath her notice that he didn't even register as a person. He was just part of the scenery. He stood there for a long time, rooted to the spot, the apology dying on his lips. He finally understood. Respect wasn't something you demanded. Competence wasn't something you shouted. They were things you were, and he was not. Meanwhile, in the rusty canteen, a small, unofficial change had been made. The stool where Cassie had sat, third from the end, was now perpetually empty. If a newcomer ever tried to sit there, one of the regulars, or even the bartender, would quietly say, "Sorry. That one's saved." There was no plaque. No sign. Just a shared understanding, a silent tribute to the night a ghost had come to their bar and taught them all a lesson. A year passed. Seasons changed. Soldiers deployed and returned. The world moved on. Fort Gideon remained a small city of discipline and purpose. In the rusty canteen, the beer was still cheap, the lighting still dim, but the atmosphere was subtly different. The loudest voices were a little quieter. The bragging a little more restrained. A healthy dose of humility had been injected into the establishment's DNA. One Friday night, a group of new recruits, fresh out of basic training and full of the unshakable confidence of youth, came in. One of them, a private named Garcia, built like a young Rex Miller, was holding court, loudly telling a story about his drill sergeant, his voice echoing through the bar. He was cocky. He was arrogant. And he was on the same trajectory Miller had been. As he finished his story to the adoring laughter of his friends, he swaggered toward the bar to order another round and went to sit on the empty stool, third from the end. Before he could, an older NCO, a master sergeant with hash marks running up his sleeve, put a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder. "Not that one, kid," the master sergeant said, his voice low and even. Garcia bristled. "Why not? Is it broken?" The master sergeant shook his head. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's the ghost seat," he said. "You don't sit in the ghost seat." Garcia, confused, looked at the empty stool. "The who?" The master sergeant smiled, a knowing, tired smile, and he began to tell the story. He told them about a loud-mouthed sergeant and a quiet woman with a book. He told them about a trader's handler and a takedown so fast, so silent, it was like something out of a movie. He got some of the details wrong, of course. In his version, she'd been reading ancient Greek, and the man on the floor was the head of the entire SVR. The legend was evolving, polishing itself, becoming more potent with each retelling. As he spoke, the young privates, including Garcia, fell silent. Their cocky grins faded, replaced by expressions of awe and dawning understanding. They were learning a lesson not in a classroom, but in a bar, from a story that had become part of the very fabric of the institution they had just joined. The true legacy of that night was not the capture of a spy or the humbling of a bully. It was the institutionalization of a lesson. It was the story itself, which had become a living, breathing piece of military folklore, a modern parable passed down from one generation of soldiers to the next. It served as a constant, quiet reminder that the most important battles are often fought silently, that the greatest strength is the one that doesn't need to announce itself. It was a testament to the idea that competence is its own validation, that precision is its own reward, and that respect is not a right conferred by uniform or rank but a recognition earned through quiet, demonstrated, irrefutable excellence. The story of Cassandra Thorne, the woman who was not there, the ghost who left nothing behind but a corrected assumption, became a bedrock principle. It taught that true professionalism isn't about what you say you can do. It's about what you have already done, often in places no one will ever know about, for reasons no one will ever understand. Her silence was her legacy. It was a silence that echoed louder than any boast. A silence that spoke volumes about duty, honor, and a level of commitment so absolute it required no audience, no applause, and no recognition. It was the silence of the true professional, a silence that is not empty, but full. Full of skill, full of discipline, and full of a calm, unshakable confidence in one's own worth. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, where professional silence defines true worth, and where the unsung heroes change everything without saying a word, subscribe to The Final Watch.